Unwavering inner conviction. We're going to talk about the concept of imagination in relation to infinite states, as in infinite potentiality of imagination, as well as maintaining certainty, which is not done from a place of force, but rather from a place of affirmation, conviction, and 8 ways to maintain this conviction in relation to the eternal now. All that exists is now. This imaginal act exists in what we would call the outer world, reflection or externalization of the inner world. What is in the process of being brought forth and what is brought forth right now through what we call experience or the journey are reflections or usually subconscious selections of what we have chosen in our imagination, which is from the potentiality of infinite states. Neville says, there are unnumbered states, and the occupant of one state is not better than the occupant of another. For each is a brother, and the highest unity are all one in the body of God the Father. But the state, the attitude of mind, to which you most certainly return, constitutes your dwelling place. What we imagine, which is revealed through visions, hunches, inspirations, inner voice conversations, mental chatter, what we say when we interpret people, environment, circumstance, information, and ourselves, represents our dwelling place, which is a reflection of a state of mind that a lot of times has been subconsciously selected based on past impressions on the subconscious from outer world experiences or assumptions based on what we would call the past. The truth is that all that actually exists is the now. And although it may appear that we're creating from the past, we also have to remember that we have the power to create from the now, as in what do we choose right now? What are we imagining right now? He calls this putting off the former conversation. The former conversation is imagination, inner voice conversations, interpretations, assumptions from past, what we would call identity. In a way, there is no identity. We select an identity, and that identity becomes our dwelling place. Now I believe we have our true identity, which is discovered through our heart desire. And our heart desire is what we use to work with our imagination, using affirmation, self-talk, revision, or environment that reflects what we desire to see in our imagination, to live the true self and thus reveal the heart desire on the journey. Through the process, we maintain a higher degree of certainty, and if we experience uncertainty, then I've got 8 ways that I have found to maintain the conviction, which is certainty of reflection of imagination in the eternal now, both as the journey and the destination. He says, I tell you that imagination creates reality. And I ask you to imagine a state, any state, which would imply the fulfillment of your desire. It doesn't really matter what anyone thinks. It's what you think that matters to you. If you create a scene which implies the fulfillment of your desire and dwell in it, until you have an inner conviction that it is real, what does it matter what another thinks? When we say another thinks, we have to remember that what we are referring to as what another thinks is our own internal inner conversation assumption of what others think. We have the power to change what others think because they are a reflection of our own thinking. Now, before we go into this a little deeper, let's play a little clip on the process that Neville outlines for working with the imagination.
Now, if I wanted something in this world, and who doesn't, I would formulate an act which would imply that I have it. And then in my imagination, I would simply, having performed that act, I would yield completely to this being within me to execute it. I would fall off into sleep, convinced that he heard me, that he saw my act in faith.
So a couple things that he mentioned. If you want anything of this world, and who doesn't? The truth is that the heart desire, what we desire to bring forth, is also revealing to us about who we actually are and the ability to work with our imagination to experience. Through working with our imagination through the process, we experience a sensation called "it is done." It is that point where we have affirmed in the subconscious mind that has gone into the subconscious realm, which is the eternal, brings it forth in ways that may not be known to us. Although as we make our subconscious more conscious through cause and effect reflection and realization of the journey, we can discover ways to bring it forth, and we can assume that those are the only ways to bring it forth, and we might teach it to others and even assume that others have to do it that way. But however, there are infinite ways to bring forth. So a couple things to remember. Number one is that if it exists in our imagination, we have the potentiality to bring it forth. However, we're going to always select what we desire, which is what we truly desire, which I call the heart desire. That is what we're going to find where we're going to impress the subconscious realm, which is really working with the depths of our being to bring it forth in a lot of times ways that we do not know. So certainty is what we want to experience. Now here's the interesting thing about this. Upon working with the imagination or affirmation or revision or any kind of subconscious work, we get a sensation that it is done. We know at that point that it is done, and everything in this outer world is in the process of rearranging itself as the mind is rearranging towards the end result which has been selected in the imagination. So reflect on this for a moment. Imagination is akin to a query on the already complete database of all the potentialities that exist. We query it in our imagination by selecting a scene. When we select that scene, we accept it, we affirm it, we confirm it, and then we move into the already complete journey, into the already complete exact potentiality of what is a mirror reflection of reality. That is what he's referring to. In that particular time when Neville was around, they didn't speak of it from a technological perspective. If you look at many of the old New Thought books that we've discussed in this channel, they all spoke of this in the exact same way, but from different perspectives. We are selecting from a database of potentialities via our imagination. All potentialities can and do exist in the imagination and can be brought forth based on what we call the burning desire. In the last video, I talked about this, the burning desire from Napoleon Hill. And the idea behind it is that the burning desire is knowing that it is done. Once you know it is done, you have selected that, and now you're on the journey to the experience and the fulfillment of that particular desire. He says you can take the same concept into all levels of your being. For any desire is a concept. You can move into any desire and express it. Anything that your heart desires, you can move into the expression of it, the fulfillment of it, through the imagination. He says, tonight, I ask you to take the most fantastic thing in this world and find an inner conviction within yourself that it is yours, for the truth of any concept is known by the feeling of certainty which that conviction inspires. So that conviction inspires certainty. Now, this is not new to us. Everything that we have desired before that we have brought forth, we have gone through a similar process. Either consciously, through working with this information consciously, through autosuggestion as discussed in the last video, through imaginal scenes that were affirmed in the subconscious to be so, or even inner voice conversations that were reflections about the experiences and changing the meaning within, the beliefs and assumptions within, to align with what he calls here the truth of any concept. So you have a concept of how you ideally want it to be experienced. You realize the truth of the concept within the imagination, as he says here. Once you have an inner feeling of certainty, don't ask me to confirm it. What would it matter what I think? So as he says that, and we reflect upon it, we realize What would it matter what I think means it's your own consciousness externalizing. You don't need to be delusioned, he says here. Do not be delusioned if your experience has not been mine. Believe in yourself. So thus, what is your heart desire? By realizing that the heart desire is yours, already a lot of fears, doubts, and indecision are being removed out of the equation and have been removed out of the equation. Do not be disillusioned, he says, if your experience has not been mine. Believe in yourself and trust your inner feeling, which is the conviction, which is the knowingness that it is done. Test yourself, and if it works on this level, it will work in the depths of your being. You can always tell the truth, he says, of any concept by the feeling of certainty which it inspires. When you imagine seeing the world as you desire to be and are inspired as to its truth, it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. Now, when he's referring to what anyone else thinks, it's not just people. It's circumstance, it's information, it's environment. Those are all interpretations and assumptions, or how we experience them are all interpretations and assumptions based on what we are thinking. So he says, I don't care what it is. When you know what you want, you can make your desire so real, so natural, that you will reach a feeling of certainty which no power in the world can stop. Because the power, or the utilization of the power, or the degree of utilization and understanding of the power, is found within, and it is externalized as the assumption of we have the power, or it's given away, or someone else has the power, this information has the power. Those are all interpretations and assumptions from within. When that feeling is yours, drop it. Don't ask anyone if what you did was right or wrong. You did it, and that's all that is necessary. The heart desire is worked with in the imagination through it is done impression. Through this selection of the infinite database of potentiality, we move down a journey called the Bridge of Incidence to the realization and fulfillment of that outcome. That is the certainty. Now, if on the journey to the fulfillment of that certain affirmed destination, we experience uncertainty, then I've got 8 ways to help you with that. He says, I'm saying, however, that you can be the man or woman you want to be, but not by simply wishing. You must take the effort to look at the world mentally and see it reflect your fulfilled desire. And when it does, you must remain in that state until you reach the inner conviction that what you are seeing, touching, tasting, smelling, and hearing is true. Clothe yourself in the feeling of its reality and explode. So there's a difference between simply wishing and selecting. If the imagination has infinite potentiality, then simply what we think about would be externalized, and it may not be a desired outcome. So what we need is a precise way of working with it. And what he's talking about here is segmenting between simply wishing and affirming. So affirming is the process of working, of how he communicates it with the imagination, to imagine the feeling of the wish fulfilled, as in what would it be like if it was true. See yourself in the possession of that until you know that it is done, the feeling of conviction. At that point, it is not a wish. It is a desire that is then interpreted through imagination as an exact experience, which is in the process of being externalized. So 8 ways to maintain conviction in relation to the eternal now. 2 perspectives. We're going to talk about it from the inner conversation and the assumption on 5 sensory data, otherwise known as the screen of space. Change your inner conversation, and you will express accordingly, as in your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors expressing. Change the assumption of 5 sensory data on the screen of space to reflect accordingly, as in the outer world's thoughts, emotions, and behaviors that reflect and relate to you. Number 1, revise how your experience is related to your desired outcome, or note to revise later during conscious reflection time. I enjoy segmenting my day. I've got my morning routine. I've got my work day, all the things that I do each day. I've got my end of day, what I call conscious rejuvenation and conscious reflection. in the conscious rejuvenation, I'm enjoying my life and doing different things that I really want to do. And oftentimes at the end of the day, in conscious reflection, where I looked at the different experiences that I had that appear to deny that I am going to bring forth what I desire, as well as experience as emotional turmoil or lack of inner conviction or anything that denies the assumption, and change it through revision, through self-talk or working with my imagination, by imagining exactly how it would be true using the same process that he outlines, just by imagining that exact scenario playing out the way that ideally I would have desired it to have played out, and then realize that it actually played out that way upon, in that moment of working with my imagination, feeling the conviction, the certainty of the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Then I know it is done, just like how he talks about in that audio snippet. Number 2, realize that 5 sensory data is a source of inspiration revealed via your inner voice. Let's say your goal is to improve your communication skills. And so you dedicate your time to developing yourself by booking the public speaking events or conversations with people on the journey every single day. And one of the fears that you have is that people won't accept you for who you are. Now, that's an assumption that we have about ourselves that can be externalized as the experiences of interpretation of them communicating with us, both in the day-to-day conversations as well as when we book the public speaking events and do the events. Now, when we realize that the 5 sensory data, which is reflected from within, and the people, environment, circumstance, and information are separate, then we change our interpretation, which reveals the accurate interpretation from within, which transcends the 5 sensory data and reflects it as the exact ability to communicate effectively. When we realize that the information that we're interpreting from the outer world is based on data that is usually from past assumptions, we become inspired to see how so. Thus, instead of a person saying to you something and then you interpret it as you're not good enough in public speaking, you interpret it as, wow, I'm actually better than I was yesterday. And more accurately put, I am on the journey to the realization and fulfillment of that exact imaginal scene that I had impressed on my subconscious. I have selected it. I've selected it from the infinite potentiality that exists. Therefore, it does exist. And it does work. I know that it is done. So now, when I'm having conversations with people, and when I'm doing my public speaking events, I notice that I'm a lot more at ease. Now, through that assumption and that affirmation, the next time you have a conversation with someone, or the next time that you show up in a public speaking event, you'll notice that the affirmations that you created based on your inner voice will reflect as your experiences with the people. Number 3, be real and accept the naturalness to let go of persona to receive wisdom from the depths of your being. Very much related. We have an identity. No one to change but self. When we change ourself, the outer world experiences, circumstance, information, and people change to reflect the concept of self. And we might find ourselves fighting internally, internal conflict between the ideal self-image and where we are right now. The easiest way to experience certainty is to just accept yourself the way you are right now. Let it go that you have to put on this persona of this ideal image. It is already done. That's not what it implies. You can make the journey as joyous as the fulfillment of the desire by realizing that just as you have the power to bring forth and select with your imagination the destination, you also have the power to select the elements of the journey within your imagination. Most of it is based on subconscious data, information, and interpretations, assumptions of yourself in relation to the screen of space and the people, environment, circumstance, and information that reveal the data that you can change within to reflect accurately, accordingly, in relation to the exact scene and desired outcome. Now, that's found through the depths of your being. And the depths of your being is realized through what I call purification of the mind. Releasing of fears, doubts, indecision-based programming on each goal that you have or each desire you see brought forth. It has a twofold benefit. Not only will you experience it, but you'll also release yourself, cleanse the disempowering programming that is within the subconscious to realize the destination. And then when you have your next desire that you want to bring forth, you'll notice that'll happen easier and potentially faster. But this is through acceptance of the process and not creating additional convolution in which we react to it and thus further affirm it. And all we're reacting to is our interpretation of that particular outer world reflection based on our assumptions within. So when I say be real and accept the naturalness, then what I'm really talking about is letting go of the persona that you have to be a certain person in order to produce the results. For example, let's use the public speaking. You saw yourself presenting a certain way and everyone receiving you really well. You saw it as a mirror reflection. You were expressing, and they were very gracious for your expression, and thus reflecting your graciousness as their experience of receiving you. Now, if you're not experiencing that right now with each conversation or each public speaking event, know that it is already done. You don't have to pretend to be that person that you saw in your imagination. Just know that the entire outer world is rearranging itself. Just the knowing that the outer world is rearranging itself, you let it rearrange yourself. Now, as a result of that, you receive wisdom from the depths of your being. What is the wisdom? The wisdom is certain assumptions, certain beliefs, certain ideas, hunches, and inspirations, which you can then take and turn into affirmations and work with these affirmations. And as a result of working with these affirmations, you will find yourself subconsciously having a more harmonious journey to the fulfillment of your destination. Number 4, maintain an orderly state of mind for accurate thinking. Now, when I'm talking about accurate thinking, I'm talking about direct reflection between your inner world and outer world, realizing that the outer world is a reflection of the inner world, more and more so each day. As you make the subconscious conscious, you realize how so. Now, that's stated. It doesn't mean we have to rack our brain trying to figure out how so that the outer world is a reflection of the inner world. Our goal is to bring forth our desire, and on the journey, we realize more so and thus purify our mind. And through the journey of purification of the mind, we'll notice that we experience other interesting, what I would call side effects, but they're actually reflections of what we have known for a long time, which is called Kingdom of Heaven Within, which is what David Hawkins talks about in Power versus Force, or Letting Go, one of those books, the state of desirelessness, which may seem contrarian, but it's actually accurate. Desirelessness means that automatically you're bringing forth what you desire. You don't have to select from your imagination. In the earlier stages, you might find yourself selecting. Afterwards, you might find yourself automatically creating what you desire without even thinking about it. And it's the exact experience that you want to have, but you didn't consciously think of it. That's because the garden of the mind has been purified to the extent, as a result of cause and effect reflection, of bringing forth what you desire, selecting in your imagination and bringing forth what you desire, experiencing it, as well as on the journey, releasing from fears, doubts, and indecision-based programming by changing the assumption about that programming within through what we call maintaining an orderly state of mind for accurate thinking. This is also called a state of bliss, calm, and certainty. Now, let's talk about changing the assumption of 5 sensory data on the screen of space to reflect accordingly. So in the first part, we're talking about changing the inner conversations. All of that is related to inner conversations. All of these reflections that I'm sharing with you came as a result of my own inner conversations. Number 5, see how what is being reflected is both a nuanced perspective and direct affirmation in contribution to your vision. I always say this, see everything as in relation and in contribution to your vision or what you desire to see brought forth. That is one of the ways to maintain the state of certainty. Nuanced perspective means that there are infinity ways of looking at anything. If imagination has infinite potentiality, then the screen of space has infinite potentiality. And no matter what you experience on this particular journey, there are different ways of looking at it. There's more of the accurate way of looking at it that is in harmony to exactly what you truly desire to experience. Everything else will take care of itself, including a lot of times the purification of the mind. Now, nuanced perspective. So as five sensory data presents itself, recognize that it's nuanced perspective, which may serve you later on, but it's not contrarian or not holding you back. If you feel that it holds you back or it breaks your flow, that's because we're interpreting that information from a certain perspective. Understand that that's just a perspective, and if we don't want to affirm it according to that perspective, we don't have to. However, if we choose to affirm it, then we affirm it, and then we value that perspective. Number 6, interaction with five sensory data on the screen of space is understood through presence-based awareness. So we call this being present to the now. As mentioned, these are 8 ways to maintain conviction in relation to the eternal now. All that exists is the now. The past can provide us some optimization data, but the ideal is to change the past in a way to be in complete harmony with affirmation to what we desire to create. Doesn't necessarily have to be, but that's one of the things that I enjoy doing, because then I find that the purification of the mind of doing that allows me to bring forth what I desire in the future with a lot more ease, precision, and flow. The future is really knowingness that it is already done through selecting from the infinite potentiality of database of imaginal scenes, which are potentialities that can be brought forth in this seen reality of the outer world. I'm selecting the exact scene. Now, from that exact scene, I go on a journey. This is how we experience reality. I enjoy the journey and the destination. Thus, what is the journey revealing about myself? And through this awareness, I can identify anything that shows up within myself, which is reflected on the screen of space, and change that assumption over to inner conviction. Number 7, detach yourself from the outcome to understand emotional polarization. Now, the feeling of the wish fulfilled is working with the 5 senses in the imagination. It has little to do what we traditionally refer to as emotions. Feeling of certainty is knowing that it is done. It's a subconscious feeling of conviction. Working with the 5 senses in the imagination is experiencing the 5 senses, selecting from the potentialities that exist in our imagination, which is beyond wishful thinking, into conscious affirmation of that imaginal scene to see it brought forth. What can be experienced on this journey, because we've been so identified with our emotions, is what I call emotional polarization, which is what I learned from the book The Kabbalion by the 3 initiates. The idea is that because we have so much association and meaning to emotions, we might find ourselves polarizing to certain information that is being presented on the screen of space based on the data and assumptions that we have within. Based on what someone says, based on certain information, based on certain circumstance, based on certain environment, we experience what we call emotional polarization. In other words, a disempowering emotion, or an empowering emotion, or an emotion of anger and frustration, or an emotion of conviction and excitement. All of these emotions are interpretations of assumptions that we have within. We can, if we choose to, release from it by changing the meaning, so we can change the inner world relation to outer world relation, and thus experience what we call different emotions, which is actually what is referred to as transmutation. Transmutation is turning one potential reaction, emotional reaction, into another potential emotional reaction. For example, in sales, in the entrepreneurial space, or if you're a sales rep, or if you're doing sales in whatever shape or form, when someone experiences rejection, they may feel an emotional reaction of frustration or anger or any of those undesired emotions. They have the ability to change the assumption that they have through affirmation in relation to what we would call rejection, which is a five-sensory outer world screen of space experience, to actually evoke the emotion of excitement. This is something that I was able to do. We have the power to transmute it if we would like, or we could detach ourselves from it. Just understand that the emotions have nothing to do with holding you back from the fulfillment of what you desire, whatever way works for you. Number 8, know that the five sensory data is revealing a chain of cause and effect, which reveals the chain of cause and effect within. In other words, you can observe people, you can observe what's going on in the outer world, and you can see the cause and effects as a result of their behaviors, as a result of the information interacting with each other, the environments interacting with each other, and you can learn about the cause and effects that occur in the outer world. These cause and effects that occur from the outer world also occur based on our assumptions in the inner world. What we want to do is bring them into a level of alignment, aligning the inner world, the creation world, with the outer world, the world of nature. If you choose to do this kind of activity, you will find that you'll have a greater understanding of what the chain of cause and effects that are happening in the outer world mean, in accuracy to not just what you desire to bring forth, but part of a bigger journey, which is what Neville calls the promise. When you understand this, you will experience a higher degree of conviction in relation to your goals, your desires, that which you want to see brought forth, as well as a greater degree of harmony and understanding how all the outer elements, five sensory data elements, as well as your inner world law of assumption, fit together. If you want to copy this mind map, the link is in the description. Thank you very much for watching. I'll talk to you soon. Take care.